Have you ever watched the news and quietly thought to yourself, how could anyone possibly do something like that? A stranger scams an elderly couple out of their life savings. A crowd watches someone being bullied without stepping in. A soldier follows an order that destroys innocent lives. An ordinary employee helps build a system that hurts thousands of people they've never met. We instinctively search for an explanation because we want the world to make sense. We tell ourselves these people must be different. They must be monsters, psychopaths, people born without empathy. It's a comforting belief, because if evil belongs to them, then it could never belong to us. But history keeps telling a different story. Some of the darkest chapters in human history weren't written by mythical villains. They were written by ordinary people, teachers, parents, students, nurses, office workers, people who laughed with friends, loved their children, worried about paying bills, and believed they were doing what was necessary. That raises a deeply uncomfortable question. What if the biggest danger isn't that evil people exist? What if it's that ordinary people can slowly become capable of extraordinary harm without ever seeing themselves as evil? Here's the first twist. We often imagine evil as a dramatic choice, a single moment where someone knowingly chooses wrong over right. But the human mind almost never works like that. Instead, it changes gradually, one small decision at a time, until yesterday's impossible becomes today's normal. Imagine you're walking through a busy shopping mall when someone suddenly collapses. There are dozens of people nearby. Everyone notices, everyone hesitates. A few glance around, waiting for someone else to act. For a moment, nobody moves. It's a strange reaction. If you had been the only person there, you probably would have helped immediately. So why does having more people around sometimes make action less likely? Because your brain isn't only processing the emergency, it's also processing everyone else's behavior. Without realizing it, you're asking a silent question. If nobody else is reacting, am I misunderstanding what's happening? Psychologists call this social influence, and one well-known phenomenon related to it is the bystander effect. When responsibility is shared among many people, each individual can feel less personal pressure to act. It's not that empathy disappears. It's that uncertainty and shared responsibility quietly reshape behavior. The unsettling part is that this mechanism doesn't only influence emergencies, it influences everyday morality. When everyone laughs at a cruel joke, it becomes easier to laugh too. When everyone in an office quietly accepts a dishonest practice, speaking up suddenly feels risky. When everyone in an online community mocks the same person, joining in starts to feel normal. Not because you've become cruel overnight, because your definition of normal is slowly moving. Our brains evolved to survive in groups. For most of human history, being rejected by your tribe could be life-threatening. Belonging meant safety. Exclusion meant danger. Even today, neuroscience shows that social rejection activates many of the same brain regions involved in physical pain. Deep down, your brain still treats belonging as a survival need. That's why groups are so powerful. They don't just shape our opinions, they quietly shape our conscience. And that's exactly where the story becomes even more unsettling, because following the group is only the first step. The real transformation begins when your own mind starts helping you believe that what you're doing is not only acceptable, but right. The real transformation begins when your own mind starts helping you believe that what you're doing is not only acceptable, but right. This is where most people get the story completely wrong. We like to imagine that good people always feel guilty before doing something harmful. That conscience immediately sounds an alarm. That deep down, we always know when we've crossed the line. But the brain has a remarkable ability. It doesn't just make decisions, it explains them. Imagine you've worked for the same company for 10 years. One day your manager asks you to make a small change to a report. It isn't exactly honest, but it doesn't seem like a big deal. Everyone else signs off without hesitation. You tell yourself, it's only this once. A few weeks later, another request comes. Slightly bigger, slightly more dishonest. Again, everyone agrees. Again, you tell yourself, this is just how business works. Months later, you've become part of something you would have condemned a year earlier. What changed? Not your personality. Your story. Psychologist Albert Bandura described a process called moral disengagement, the ways people temporarily disconnect their actions from their moral standards. Instead of seeing ourselves as doing something wrong, we gradually change the story we tell ourselves. I'm just following orders. If I don't do it, someone else will. Nobody is really getting hurt. They deserved it anyway. Notice how none of these explanations begin with, "I'm a bad person," because that's almost never how the human mind works. Our identity is incredibly important to us. Most people genuinely believe they are decent moral individuals. So when our actions don't match that identity, the brain experiences psychological tension. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. The brain hates that feeling. It has two options: change the behavior or change the story. Surprisingly often, changing the story is easier. That's why history is filled with ordinary people who believed they were protecting their country, defending their family, serving justice, or simply doing their job. Intentions can feel noble, even when outcomes are devastating. One of the most famous demonstrations of this came from psychologist Stanley Milgram in the 1960s. Participants believed they were administering increasingly painful electric shocks to another person. Whenever that person answered questions incorrectly, the learner was actually an actor and no real shocks were given. But the participants didn't know that. Many looked deeply uncomfortable, some protested, some trembled, yet a surprising number continued when encouraged by the experimenter. The lesson wasn't that people enjoy causing pain. It was far more unsettling. In certain situations, the pressure to obey perceived authority can outweigh our personal moral instincts. While later researchers have debated exactly how to interpret Milgram's findings, the broader conclusion remains influential. Context can powerfully shape behavior. That's uncomfortable to hear, because we'd rather believe we'd be the exception. We imagine ourselves standing up, walking away, saying no. Maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't. The truth is, none of us really knows until we're inside the situation. And perhaps that's the most dangerous illusion of all. Evil rarely arrives wearing a mask. It arrives wearing a reason that sounds responsible, loyal, practical, necessary. Step by step, the line keeps moving. Not because people stop caring about right and wrong, but because their definition of right quietly changes, which raises an even more important question. If our minds are capable of rewriting our own morality, do we stop ourselves before the story becomes more dangerous than the truth? If our minds are capable of rewriting our own morality, how do we stop ourselves before the story becomes more dangerous than the truth? The answer begins with a realization that sounds almost disappointingly simple. You don't become a better person by believing you're incapable of doing harm. You become a better person by accepting that you are. That might be the most important lesson psychology has ever taught us. The people least likely to question themselves are often the people most convinced they're always on the right side. History is filled with individuals who believed they were heroes while becoming someone else's villain. Not because they were born without empathy, but because certainty replaced curiosity. Once they stopped asking, "Could I be wrong?" their conscience slowly lost its voice. Real wisdom doesn't come from trusting yourself completely. It comes from distrusting your certainty just enough to keep questioning it. Think about the last argument you had. Maybe it was with your partner, a friend, a coworker. While they were speaking, were you really listening? Or were you quietly preparing your next response? The uncomfortable truth is that our brains don't simply search for facts. They search for evidence that confirms the story we already believe. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. It's one of the most reliable findings in behavioral science. Once we adopt a belief, our attention naturally gravitates toward information that supports it, while we overlook or dismiss evidence that challenges it. That's not because we're dishonest. It's because certainty feels safe. Changing our minds feels like losing a part of ourselves. But that's exactly why humility is such a powerful psychological skill. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's leaving room for the possibility that your current perspective is incomplete. That single habit interrupts many of the invisible mechanisms we've explored today. It weakens the pressure to follow the crowd. It makes blind obedience less automatic. It exposes the stories we tell ourselves before they become excuses. Most importantly, it reminds us that being human means being capable of both compassion and cruelty. The question is never which side exists inside us. Both do. The question is which side we feed through our daily choices, and those choices are rarely dramatic. They're almost invisible. Do you laugh at the joke that humiliates someone who isn't there? Do you stay silent because speaking up feels uncomfortable? Do you dehumanize people you've never met because your social media feed keeps rewarding outrage? Or do you pause for just a moment before joining the crowd? That pause may seem insignificant. It isn't. Psychologists sometimes describe self-control as creating space between an impulse and a response. In that small space, the brain's more reflective systems have a chance to evaluate what our automatic reactions might otherwise decide for us. We don't eliminate our instincts. We simply give wisdom enough time to catch up. Perhaps that's what courage looks like in everyday life, not standing alone in front of history, but making dozens of quiet decisions that history will never record, choosing fairness when dishonesty would be easier, choosing curiosity when certainty feels more comfortable, choosing empathy before judgment, choosing to see another human being as fully human, even when everyone around you is encouraging the opposite. Those moments rarely become headlines, yet they shape the kind of person you become. Maybe that's why the question, why do normal people commit evil, isn't really about evil at all. It's about the fragile architecture of the human mind. The same brain that can justify cruelty can also recognize it. The same social instincts that can pull us toward the crowd can inspire extraordinary acts of kindness. The same imagination that invents excuses can imagine a better way to respond. In the end, being a good person isn't a permanent identity you earn once and keep forever. It's a practice, a series of ordinary decisions made when no one is watching, because evil rarely begins with hatred. It often begins with an unexamined story, and perhaps the wisest life isn't one where you never make the wrong choice, but one where you never stop asking yourself whether the story you're living is still true.